Okay, this tutorial is going to focus on how to render this center building here. And there are a few important parts to this. One is, even in the original drawing, you can see that there's a fairly high amount of contrast between these. So it's a distant building. We're not going to have a lot of detail on it. We do want to give it some color variation and maintain that contrast. If we look at this as the actual building, a photograph of it from a different angle, and you can see the sun angle is kind of opposite of what we're working with. The sunlight is on the right and the shading is on the left. But you can get the idea of the character of the building, and I applied a filter to it so you could see a little bit of subtle color variations in this. If you really look at it carefully, you can see those. So as we're rendering this, we want to make sure that we get that light dark contrast across these two surfaces. Another thing that I want you to keep in mind is we're going to add the most detail to this upper area here, and we're not going to worry about the lower area in terms of detail. This area we're going to kind of shade in and try and make sure that it's it's visible, but that it's not going to be the same quality as what's up above. We're not going to deal with window reflections. Since this will really be shaded by other buildings that are around it, we're not going to add those window reflections, and we're going to keep it simple because this upper part is kind of more important in terms of the composition, and this lower part really serves as background, and we want the attention to be focused on the plaza down here. So anyway, that's what we're going to work on. So let me get rid of this layer. And while we're here, we can talk about this. I basically set up a center building layer group, and I have a base, a shaded side, and a lighted side. Now, I think I use this for construction purposes, just again, as you know, to keep it simple, keep it easy. I can edit things. And then once I'm done, however, I will merge these together. I don't think in this case the background building needs to maintain those separate layers, but it does make it a little easier for editing. So we're going to start with the base layer. And we're going to pick a color that is, this building in reality is kind of a peach, light peach colored building, and I've actually saved one already in my color swatches. And if I click on that and look at it, you can see it's down between the orange and the red range, and fairly light, kind of medium color. Since I moved that, let's pull that up again. So again, very kind of light peach color, and we're going to start with this, and I have a feeling that since I've run through this a couple times, I know it's going to end up a little bit dark, but it does make it a little easier to create some subtle variations. And then once we're done, we'll merge the layers together and we'll adjust it just like everything else. Once we see it in the composition, it is a background element and we want it to be able to move to the background. But let's start with that. And the other thing I've started with is deciding what brush to use. I want something that's going to give me some variation. And I was using a watercolor brush down here. I think you could use any of the, you could use the drippy water, although since this is an architectural element, it is going to make it difficult to hit the edges and keep them nice and crisp, and we need to do that. So, this marker would be a good one. Let's go on up the list here. Some of these other watercolors, Watercolor Wash, Watercolor Buildup, I've used either of those, but so let's try the Watercolor Wash. So at the first step, I'm going to add this base peach color to everything, to both sides. I'm not going to worry about light and shade because I'm going to come back and darken and lighten based on the sunlight after I get done. The other thing is the only real edge I need to worry about carefully is this one right here, if you can see where I'm painting, because it's the only one that I have to cut in, so to speak. The rest of this, everything's going to be covered up, so I don't care about the edges. In fact, you can see that I'm completely painting over the building, but since my sky layer is actually above the building and it has a layer mask, it's going to cut that out. So that's one nice thing. You don't really have to worry about being careful. You're not going to see it. So just paint that on quickly, get some variations, and get kind of a nice even tone. Make sure you don't have any white spots or areas that are missing. Now the next step is I can approach this next step two ways. Let's start with the dark side, and I can darken that up by picking a darker peach color, but I could also darken it up just by switching to my multiply mode. And that's going to allow me, you can see that every time I go over that, it's darkening up a little bit. And what I like about this is it is giving a kind of nice soft grain. And you also notice I'm also doing this on the same layer. So in this case, since I didn't do that, I'm going to just keep going the way it is. Probably just keep the shaded side on the base layer since we're going to merge it anyway. We do want a separate layer to come back in for the sunlit side because I need to create a really sharp edge, and I'm going to get rid of this watercolor brush and just use a standard brush to do that. So I'll keep going for the sake of the tutorial. If you want to do this on your shaded layer, you could, but again, what I'm doing is I'm darkening this up, but I'm also trying to create this little bit of a gradient from top to bottom, because as it moves down, gets closer to the ground, there's more buildings, there's more shade, and actually, it just becomes a little denser. But I still need to do that. These areas, I could also, step the brush size down a little bit and control that a little bit more. So again, the key with the multiply is every time you pick up the brush and put it back down, it's going to intensify that even more. So this is just another way to add that kind of intensity without actually switching colors. You're just letting the multiply. Now this will result in a much darker, more intense color than we want for the overall product. But as I said, we can always just use our hue saturation adjustment and fix that. Now, as I get in here to these smaller areas, it gets a little more difficult to get the intensity I want without having to go over it multiple times. So in that case, I am going to switch down to a darker color and just start painting that over there. Again, you can see shaded side. In this case, now I have this set on normal. I don't have the multiply setting on anymore. So take it all the way up here to these areas. Again, I'm not worried in this case. I'm going to be careful one time, and that's with the sunlit side. Shaded side, I'm just going to go quick, get the effect, get the darkness that I want on there. And if I wanted to add a little bit more intensity, I could pop up the multiply, because we do want to have good contrast, especially at that edge. So I'm just going to go over those edges a little bit more. And again, even though we probably won't see this detail, the fact that I'm going back and forth over this, and if I zoom in on it, you can see that it's creating that really nice, subtle, soft texture to it. And I think that's it's going to have a nice touch to it, even if we don't see that specifically in everything. Okay, so let's back up and take a look at this. So it looks like it's still, not quite as dark down here as I'd like to be. And maybe this side needs to darken up some too. Let's make it a little bit bigger for this side now. Again, nice thing about having this edge already masked is I don't have to be very careful. So I'm really going to darken that up, try and get that contrast there. Okay, so we zoom out a little bit, you can start seeing that that's starting to create the shading, but clearly it's not very sharp. It doesn't give us that nice crisp edge that we were looking at here. So that's the last step, to go in and do that kind of carefully. And to do that, I definitely want to switch to my lighted side layer. So for this, I'm going to, let's go back to our original peach color that we used. Click on that, and maybe go a little bit lighter for that as well. So I'm going to set from multiply back to normal. I'm going to just go up and pick a hard round brush, and right now this is 19 pixels and it's set to pressure to size, so I can kind of move right in on that. And again, where these areas are sunlit, I really want to pop out that edge. Now you might as well zoom in this case. And I think I'm going to turn the size variation off. And I just noticed that I wasn't seeing my brush preview, and that if you see that happen, that's usually because the caps lock key is down, and when that's down you can't really see the size. So I'm going to shift that down maybe to 8 pixels, and now I can come in here and just create some variations across the edge. But I particularly want to, I don't mind some of that darker tone coming through there, but right along these areas I want to make sure that's really sharp. And I'm creating some of those ripples across there because they kind of represent the fact that there are other buildings with reflections coming off the buildings, and there's just a lot of color mixing going on in an urban environment that you want to reflect. So again, if you want to leave some of those highlights in there, that's great. We're going to deal with the windows in the next tutorial along with the reflections for the other ones. Now this is where I might want to turn my opacity on with my pressure, so I can come in here and get some subtle variations if I want to. So remember, all the sunlit surfaces, you come in here and really pop those out. The key really is where they intersect the shaded areas, because that's, I think you'll see as we zoom out in a minute and take a look at this, compared to what it looked like before, it's going to look much better because we're going to have that really sharp contrast between light and dark that we were just missing. We had the basic values, but we didn't have the contrast, especially at those edges. It's worth the time in this case to probably come in there so you can see it a little more closely. And also so you can get really straight lines quickly. So again, I saved myself some time by not really worrying about this, but worrying about being careful as I went down across the other sides, because I knew I was going to come in here and clean this up anyway. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit. Now you can see that's looking a lot better, a lot more sharp. And if you see any spots that look like they're not good enough, just go back and touch those up. Okay, there's a couple other things. If we look at this building, you don't really have to worry about this detail, but right through here there's actually a section of louvers. I don't know if that's mechanical rooms or something else, and there's also a little bit of darker trim at the top. So if you want to add that kind of detail in, you're welcome to. It wouldn't take too much to come in here. Again, same color, darken it down, go back in with a little smaller brush maybe. Zoom in. Yeah, let's go a little bit smaller. And just kind of paint those in if you want to. As I said, I will demonstrate the windows for this building. Basically, it's the same technique for all the windows, just a little more intricate selecting with the magic wand in this case, but otherwise it's exactly the same. So coming in here, filling in those windows. Again, I'm turning the pressure sensitivity off for the shaded sides, so it puts it in nice and dark. And then I'm leaving the pressure sensitivity on for the sunlit side, so it actually goes on a little bit lighter, or I can at least apply it a little bit lighter. Okay, so something like that, if you want to put in the trim, you could do that there. But I think in terms of the basic character, it's got some little bit of color variations in there. It's not perfectly uniform. It has a little bit of texture from that watercolor brush, and that's kind of the thing we're after. For this lower area down here, I could go back up, you know, something just a little bit darker, and shade that in. Maybe that has to go a little bit darker even from there. And I'm not even going to worry about the contrast on the buildings or anything else down here. I'm just trying to blend that in and create that kind of shadow pattern, let that kind of fade into the background a little bit more. Okay, so that's kind of what we're after. Now, I think that can work okay. It's just when I look at this as a composition, since that is the farthest background element in the composition, it does seem a little far away. So I'm going to go into my layers now. Let's go back, and we're going to select all three of those layers and go to our menu and just merge those together. And now that we have them merged together, let's pull up our image adjustments, hue, saturation, and we can do some saturation. First of all, we're going to lighten it up, and maybe we'll drop the saturation a little bit. If we keep lightening it enough, then we can bump the saturation back up, because we do want it to really look like it's in the background. So I'll move this over a little bit. You can see that's the before and that's the after, and that's really more the effect that we're looking for. We don't want it to be dominant in the view itself. We just want it to have that kind of nice quality to it, but it is easier to do that, get those subtle variations and make that work while it's a little bit darker, and then lighten it up just by doing an overall adjustment. Okay, so you can do some variations on that, but again, I try and keep it in that basic color scheme, since that is the actual color of the building on the site. And in the next tutorial, I'll go through adding the windows, which will really finish that off and make it look nice.